The NFC East was a dumpster fire in 2020, but for fantasy football, it wasn't that bad. Let's break down the coaches of the NFC East with SI senior fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano. And Fabs, let's start with your Dallas Cowboys, Mike McCarthy. It was his first year as Dallas's head coach last season. What can we expect in 2021?
Well, of course, McCarthy's been an NFL OC or head coach for a long, long time. And during that time, he's produced 27 top 24 fantasy wide receiver finishes. That's been pretty reliable in terms of fantasy football production. The wide receivers have always thrived. Of course, it's been very beneficial to have some of the quarterbacks that McCarthy has had, including Aaron Rodgers and then Dak Prescott for 5 games last season. But he's also had 13 instances where a wide receiver has finished wide receiver 9 or better. That includes guys like Devontae Adams, Jordy Nelson, Joe Horn in New Orleans, Donald Driver, Greg Jennings. And McCarthy's teams have also been able to have 2 solid wide receivers on the roster from a fantasy perspective. And that's what we're going to have in Dallas in 2021. Last season, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, both finished among the top 25 wide receivers. And it could have been better had Dak Prescott not gotten injured in the 5th game. So just because Cooper and Lamb and Michael Gallup are all on the roster, it seems like there's a lot of mouths to feed. I think at least 2 of those players, Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, can certainly live up to or maybe exceed expectations from a fantasy perspective.
Let's take a look at the Giants. Jason Garrett, the offensive coordinator there, longtime Dallas Cowboys head coach. He's now with New York, his 2nd season as their OC. Any insight onto what we can expect from some of the Giant playmakers based on Garrett's historical coaching decisions?
And we'll stick with the wide receivers. He's had 6 top 10 fantasy wide receivers during his time as an OC or a head coach. He had 13 top 24 finishes during his time with the Dallas Cowboys. Again, 6 were in the top 10, including Terrell Owens. Des Bryant did it 3 times. Miles Austin, remember him? And then Amari Cooper. The best fantasy finish among Giants wide receivers last year wasn't good. It was Sterling Shepard at wide receiver 43. But the G-men did bring in Kenny Golladay, and although the Giants do have a lot of options in the passing game, you would think that based on the money they spent, Kenny G will likely lead this team in targets, assuming he can stay healthy and Daniel Jones can maybe develop into a good fantasy quarterback, which some of us were hoping would happen last season.
The Philadelphia Eagles, they have a new head coach. It's his first time coaching, or it's his first job as a head coach. But we do have some insight based on what he has done during his past role as quarterback coordinator, offensive coordinator type of situation with Indianapolis.
Right. So Frank Reich was calling a lot of the plays, right? But you look back at what those Colts teams did, and Sirianni as the OC had just 1 wide receiver ranked better than wide receiver 42 in those 3 years. That was T.Y. Hilton in 2018. He was the wide receiver 14. But also keep in mind, the Colts didn't exactly have a whole ton of talent at wide receiver. Like, he had Michael Pittman last year, but he was a rookie. Then you're talking about Zach Pascal and guys like that. Now he's in Philadelphia. And while Jalen Reagor was a disappointment last season, he's still going to be worth a late-round flyer. The player, of course, to target here is Devontae Smith. And I don't think Sirianni has had a young wide receiver with the talent of Devontae Smith in the NFL. So let's see what he does with him. I think Smith's probably better used as a wide receiver 4, at least for redraft purposes. A guy with maybe a bit of a higher ceiling, but let's just put it this way. The Eagles are going to run the football a bunch, and Jalen Hurts is a very mobile quarterback who didn't have a great pass percentage in terms of accuracy last season. So Smith, to me, is a guy that you can get somewhere in the middle to late rounds as a wide receiver 4 who maybe exceeds expectations, but it's going to be interesting to see how Sirianni uses him because, once again, he's never had a weapon like Smith in any of his offenses in Indianapolis.
Just saw a couple photos of Smith. Heisman Trophy winning year while he was at Alabama. Let's go finish off with our final NFC East team, and that's the Washington football team, where Terry McLaurin, he's been a dominant force for fantasy football. I think he's very undervalued. But what does their OC have to do with how we can expect the Washington football playmakers to perform this year?
Yeah, McLaurin was very good last year. I still feel like there's room for improvement. He was only the wide receiver 20, and now I feel like he could end up being maybe a wide receiver 1, so potentially having that next step into that big breakout elite season. But let's focus on the running backs, right? Scott Turner's dad is who? It's Norvell Turner. And Norv Turner, well, he had a lot of success with running backs. Of course, he coached some great ones like LaDainian Tomlinson and Emmitt Smith along the way. But last year, Scott Turner's offense produced 2 top 17 fantasy running backs. Antonio Gibson was the RB13. J.D. McKissick was the RB17. Now, I feel like McKissick's going to fall off in terms of the targets because he had well over 100. Combined, they had 154. But with the addition of Curtis Samuel, who Turner knows from his time in Carolina, I think those targets to the backfield may decrease in terms of McKissick. But Antonio Gibson, as long as this kid is 100% going into training camp and in the preseason, well, he is certainly a high-end number 2 fantasy running back, and he'll likely come off the board in the 3rd round in most redrafts. And Turner's offense, if it's anything like the old man's, and it looked like it was last season, Gibson's going to get plenty of work.
Smart fantasy football managers know that it matters what kind of scheme, what kind of offensive system these playmakers are playing in. And Fabs, that's why you broke down every head coach and their offensive coordinator. It's all up on Sports Illustrated. Go check it out. si.com/fantasy.